If you are someone with ADHD or just a few ADD-like tendencies and you're either trying to run a business, start a business, or you have a plethora of ideas that you've worked a little bit on, but they've gone nowhere, then I really need you to hear today's episode because I'm going to run through some of the major ugly truths that are a reality for those of us who are neurodivergent and have very busy brains and very often struggle in building a business for themselves. So I am not going to hold back on what those ugly truths are. They are based on my own experience and all of the ADHD entrepreneurs that I have worked with personally, but I'm not going to leave you with just the ugly, raw truth because I personally believe that if you know what you're up against and you can plan for it, you can actually accommodate for all of the hard parts of ADHD and not only do just as well as a neurotypical, but in some cases better because we have those great strengths like hyperfocus and fast thinking brains. We can pick up patterns, all of those things. I will go through them in more detail towards the end of the video and what you can do to set yourself up for success. But let's start with the 5 ugly truths about running a business with ADHD. And the first ugly truth is something I actually already alluded to, and that is the sheer number of ideas that our brains come up with. I can point out an ADHD entrepreneur immediately when someone tells me that they're trying to run 2 businesses while launching another 3 on the side. And the problem with that is that when you're already working with lower dopamine levels, it's really hard to have enough dopamine to think through everything you need to get started, sustain the process even when it gets hard and boring, and actually follow through. If we are able to do that with one idea, then that is a grand slam home run. But that is generally not what happens. We start off with a bunch of ideas because we know deep down some of these are not going to work. So we assume we'll just get started on everything and let the chips fall where they may. And the problem with that is that you never really get any significant progress enough to see if an idea is viable and actually see it through. What happens is we go off in a million directions. We divide our attention across all of these various different ideas. Some never get started. Some get to some level of starting, but then never go anywhere. And some we forgot we even started in the first place. So what happens at the end of this cycle is that we burn out because we're exhausted trying to do too many things. We've eroded our own self-trust, reminding ourselves that we tend to start things and never finish them, and even more dopamine depleted at the end of this experience because dopamine comes from seeing something from start to finish and feeling the appreciation, satisfaction of actually completing a project loop. So when you never complete project loops, you never get that dopamine. And the only way to get that dopamine is to go back to the drawing board and come up with a whole new bunch of ideas that you're excited about, right? So we get a little bit of dopamine in the excitement phase, but nothing ever comes through to fruition. And that is a really dark, ugly truth that I have encountered very often for myself. I've seen that in a lot of my clients. And the reality is that this is, I think, where most of us get hung up. And if we're not able to find a way out of it, then we end up not ever finding success as a business owner. And I hate to see that, which is why I love coaching business owners so much, because if I can see that pattern happening in them, I can help them move through it. And that brings me to the second ugly truth of being an ADHD entrepreneur. And that is if you are not emotionally connected to the business idea that you have, even if it's a brilliant idea and you've managed to just pick one idea and go for it, if you're not emotionally connected to the business itself and the mission and what you're gunning for, at some point you will eventually probably get bored of it and want to either move on, burn it down, or just completely poop out. And again, I've seen this not only in myself, but in other people. When you come up with a brilliant idea and maybe you share it with a few people and they go, oh my God, that's an awesome idea. And you're like, right? That's an awesome idea. I should do this. And you get excited and caught up in this new idea that is such a good idea and is perfect for someone. But unfortunately, it is not perfect for you because this is an idea you only came up with last week and is based on an obsession that you've had for maybe a month or two. And you know that you tend to cycle through interests a lot faster than the average neurotypical. So this idea might be super exciting at first, but what happens is that over time, you start to get bored of it because the reality is that business ownership isn't that exciting. And if you are not emotionally connected to the audience and the purpose of what's behind the product or service you're offering, it starts to become a drag. I got into this dilemma with the protein pancake company that I created. I thought it was a brilliant idea and I had always wanted to do a food business. And at the time, I was really into fitness. I knew the audience that would appreciate this product, and certainly they did. But the problem is that 2 years years in, I was still struggling to make a profit because the food industry is really hard to succeed in. And I was so tired of serving and talking to my ideal client, which was bodybuilders. Because at that point, I had moved on from bodybuilding. I didn't want to hear about cuts and bulking and loading and all of the things. I was just completely checked out of that obsession, and it made it almost impossible to follow through with the business because I was so mentally checked out of that whole industry that I just couldn't keep pushing through. So the ugly reality here is that if you are one of those people who cycles through hobbies and gets really obsessed with things, but then all of a sudden one day they're completely boring to you, you move on, that's probably going to happen to you in a business context as well. And it's a lot harder to walk away from a business after you've invested 2 years into building it up and all of the marketing and branding and just general business sweat equity that you've put into something that you just can no longer deal with because it is so boring to you. And that brings me to the next ugly truth about ADHD entrepreneurship, and that has to do with our executive function issues. We generally struggle with things like prioritization, organization, planning, follow through, and we have a lot of impulsivity. And because of all of those things, we do have a tendency to have unrealistic expectations about what's possible in a certain amount of time. So we might see people in social media saying, hey, I just had a 7-figure launch in the last week, or I had $1 million sale in my first year of business. And that's great. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but we assume those things must be true. And what we don't realize or we're not able to see because we don't have the skills or experience or awareness of what goes into these launches, we just assume that it might be possible for us too. So we impulsively set up these expectations for ourselves. And when it doesn't work out because our expectations were not aligned with reality, we make it about us. We make ourselves feel like we're failures and we can't do anything right. And in reality, it has nothing to do with our capabilities. It has to do with our skills, our experience, and our ability to walk through something, understand what's really involved, how long it's actually going to take, and then actually doing that thing to completion. And if I'm being totally honest, I actually think it's really important that we do have those failures because that opens your eyes to what the realities truly are. Whereas if you just happen to have hit out of the park idea and everything went well on your first launch or your first business, you're going to have the assumption that every business is going to be like that. And unfortunately, business ebbs and flows just like our energy and attention does. So having a few failures under your belt when you're starting out is actually quite sobering and very helpful in terms of managing your own expectations about what's possible with your limited capacity and resources and everything else you have to deal with in your life as an adult. The next ugly truth is actually going to sting a little bit because as much as we crave spontaneity and freedom to do things when we want to do them and just, play at the whim of our interest-driven nervous systems, the reality is if we don't have structure, we end up flailing around and getting absolutely nowhere. So when you start a business, you're usually a party of one and you are responsible for doing everything and being accountable to yourself. And if you don't do the things, they just don't get done and the business never happens. And that is a big problem for ADHDers. We need time urgency, we need accountability and structure. We need to know exactly what needs to be done, where and when and how in order to take the steps necessary to launch a business and keep it going. So unless you're able to either accommodate for not having structure as you build your business or find the structure you need in order to keep yourself going, you are probably going to end up spinning in procrasta planning, procrasta learning, procrasta tweaking your logo for the 14th time and picking your colors and fonts, but making no meaningful progress in your business. And then the last ugly truth that I see so many brilliant ADHD entrepreneurs being held back by is just a sheer lack of organization. And I mean that in terms of how we plan and organize our time, but also how we plan and organize systems in our business. We end up creating a lot of great things and we put them in an important place so that we don't forget about them. And then we forget where that place is. And then we have to recreate the thing again, or we forget we ever created the thing in the first place because working memory issues. So that lack of organization and not having a structure of how to think about how you're spending your time in the most appropriate way can really set us back because we end up wasting our precious time, energy, and resources on the wrong things. And that is exactly why I created the Organized Business to help ADHD entrepreneurs not only think about planning their weeks, months, and years, but also how to organize the really important components of their business so they don't waste time looking for things or recreating them. So if you want to check that out, I will link to it right here. But having an organization organization system of some kind is critically important. So those are the 5 ugly truths that I've experienced myself and I've seen in a lot of my ADHD entrepreneur clients. But it's not all bad. And that's what I want you to hear, because the flip side of this coin is that ADHDers can actually make really good entrepreneurs. There's a reason why we are 400 times more likely to start a business than an average neurotypical. And that is that motivation for freedom and to pursue passions and interests. And when we find that sweet spot of the right interest that we have room to grow in so that we get bored of it and it challenges us at the right level, we can really shine as entrepreneurs because we are really creative and we do see patterns and connections that most other people miss. So we come up with really unique and compelling ideas. We're incredible problem solvers. And when we are hyper-focused on something, we're generally faster and more efficient than anyone else doing the same task. And here's what I believe to be true about starting a business with ADHD. If you are aware of the things that generally hold us back, then you can be intentional about planning for them, making sure you're choosing the right idea, making sure you're choosing only one idea, creating the right structures so you can ensure you follow through, and having smart organizational systems that work for you and your brain. I've said this before and I'll say it again. The reason I think that I was successful in this business rather than the previous businesses is because of the idea and business framework that I chose, and also because of the organization skills that I built and the tools that I have to keep me organized and consistent. Otherwise, I don't think that I would have had any more success with this business than I had in the past. So the question I have for you, whether you're an existing business owner or you're thinking of starting something, is are you picking a business that has long enough legs where you can run with it for a long time? Meaning the interest is something you've had for a long time and there's room for you to shape things towards your own preferences and energy levels so that it's not a constant struggle. And if the answer to that is yes, great. The next question I have for you is, are you willing to be a lifelong learner? Because you are going to have to learn so many new skills and you're going to have to test things and iterate and things are going to fail. And if you are not approaching everything you do in your business with the learning mindset, then if you have a failure, you're probably making it about you. You're making it a personal thing rather than looking at the data. And that is going to get you nowhere, especially if you struggle with RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria. So if you answer yes to those 2 questions and you're willing to only focus on one business, then I 100% think that you have what it takes to be a successful ADHD entrepreneur and enjoy the freedoms that come with it. You just have to keep at it and never give up on yourself. I hope that was helpful. Thanks for being here, guys, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.